Hi guys, Dusty here from Discovery Lab in Tulsa, Oklahoma for Discover at Home, a series of activities, projects, and experiments that can be done at home with an adult or caregiver. Today we are celebrating Earth Sciences Week, and we're going to be talking a little bit about fossils, and I'm going to show you how to make your own. If you'd like to make a fossil along with me, here's some things you're going to need. First thing you'll need is plaster of Paris. This can be found at most hardware stores. It is slightly dangerous, so make certain that you do have an adult nearby and you perform this experiment with an adult. You'll need some water to mix with your plaster of Paris. You'll need a disposable cup or bowl that you can mix it in. I've got a popsicle stick to help me stir it. I want to be able to throw this away when I'm done because it's going to be really messy. So don't use something nice that you'd want to eat out of. Definitely use something that's going to be thrown in the trash when you're done. You'll also need a way to measure. I've got an 1/8 cup right here that I'm going to use to measure because I'm going to be making a very small one. If you plan on making a larger fossil, you might need to mix up more or use a larger measuring cup or a larger mixing cup. The next thing you're going to need is you're going to need something to make your fossil in. I'm going to be using some sand right here. You could just go out and get sand from your backyard. Try and get stuff that's a little bit moist. If it's too dry, this won't work very well. If you don't have sand, you could easily use something like wet coffee grounds or some other fine material that will hold an impression. So this is what I'm going to use, is this kind of moist sand that I've got here. Then I've got a plate. You could use a bowl, you could use a dish of some kind, anything that's going to let you get about a 1/2 inch or so of your material in there. Or if you don't have this, you could actually go and do it outside. If you've got a good spot where you've got some kind of fine wet sand or kind of clay that will hold the shape really well, you could technically do this outside if you wanted to. The next thing you're going to need is you're going to need something that's going to be your fossils. I've got some dinosaur toys right here. You could easily use cars, small dolls, action figures, anything like that. Something that has a shape that you can recognize. Definitely something you're going to realize what it is when you pull it out. Otherwise, it might look kind of like a blob. And the last thing you're going to want is you're going to want a paintbrush to help clean off your fossil once you're done with it. So while you guys are getting those materials together, I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about fossils. Well, what is a fossil? Have you guys ever seen a fossil before? Believe it or not, there are tons of fossils that can be found right here in Oklahoma. That's because millions and millions of years ago, Oklahoma was actually covered with water, and there were tons of very small ocean life forms that lived in this water. Whenever they passed away, they fell to the bottom of the ocean, where very thick, dense mud covered them up. As that mud covered them up, the softer tissues tended to kind of dissolve and wash away, but they left a hole where they once were. Then minerals were able to seep in, like how water is able to seep in and form stalactites and stalagmites in a cave. That filled that hole or that mold, creating a fossil. That's why a lot of our fossils are aquatic or underwater creatures. It's sometimes hard to find above ground fossils like you would think of for dinosaurs. Those ones that we tend to find usually happen near mud, tar, water, or in the case of volcanic eruption, a lava flow that would cover them up quickly. In order for a fossil to form, it has to happen in a very, very specific way. That's why it's sometimes hard to find fossils everywhere, because it doesn't always have the exact right qualities to create a fossil. Well, I hope you guys have got your materials together, because I'm going to start showing you how to make your own fossil. The first step you're going to do is you're going to get your moist sand and your plate. I'm going to get a couple handfuls and just kind of put it in here. You want something that's going to kind of clump together. So don't get anything that's going to just kind of fall apart. You definitely want to be able to form clumps. See how mine kind of sticks together in clumps? That means it's going to be able to hold its shape really well. And just kind of flatten it in there until you get it pretty even. You can see I've flattened it in there right there. It doesn't have to be perfect, but you want it to be pretty even. That's going to help make certain we get a really good imprint. So the type of fossil we're going to be creating is we're first going to create a mold. And then that mold is going to let us create a cast. And I'll talk about those two differences whenever we start doing it. Alright, so I've got my sand right here ready to go. And if you're doing this outside, you could find a nice flat area that had some moist sand or some clay, and you could kind of scrape it flat if you wanted to. Use a shovel to get it nice and smooth so you can get a really good imprint with it. I'm going to set that aside. Now I'm going to mix up my plaster of Paris. Now, as I said before, kids, definitely have an adult with you whenever you're using this plaster of Paris. You can see I've got a plastic bag over it because I don't want any of it to leak out or get on things. This is a very fine dust, and it can irritate your eyes or your throat. Do this in a big open area or outside if you can. If you don't have some type of eye protection, I'd suggest you put on some type of safety goggles or something else to make certain that it's a little bit harder for things to get right in your eyes. Be safe when you're doing science, kids. Now, I'm going to open this guy up and you can kind of see I get a little bit of that dust kind of popping out. I want to be as careful as I can. I don't want to breathe it in. Like I said, it would make me cough really bad. Open this up right here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to mix this up in a 1-to-1 ratio. That means I'm going to put an equal amount of water and an equal amount of plaster together. If you wanted to make it a little bit different, you could alter that or change that a little bit. If you wanted your plaster to be thicker, you use less water. If you want it to be thinner or runnier, you can use more water. But know that the more water you use, the longer it's going to take for this guy to dry. I'm going to mix it up so it'll dry in a couple of hours, the way I'm going to do this. If you make it a little bit thicker, it'll dry a lot faster, but it'll be a little bit lumpier. You might not get that nice, smooth picture we're looking for. If you do it really watery, it might take a day or more to dry completely. So, let's start mixing up. I'm going to use my scoop. I'm going to scoop out 1/8 of a cup, and I'm going to level it out to make sure I get a good level cup, because I want to be absolutely perfect on that. Level 1/8 of a cup right there. Put that into my cup. Now I'm going to measure out the same amount of water. That's what a 1-to-1 ratio means. It means that it's an equal amount of both things. So pour that in nice and gently. Get just right there at 1/8 of a cup. Pour that in. And now I'm going to stir it gently. Don't stir this too fast. If you remember what I said before about the dust not being very good to get in your throat or your lungs, if you stir it too fast, you might kind of hoof it up in your face. So stir it gently. You'll notice it starts to get pretty nice and liquid. If you've ever made oobleck before, it's going to look a lot like this. So you guys can see mine is fairly liquid and watery. It stirs really easily. It's going to pour real easily. This one takes a couple of hours to get nice and dry. If you wanted to, like I said, use less water or use more of the plaster of Paris to make it thicker. Alright, I've got my plaster of Paris mixed up. Now I'm going to make my mold. Now, whenever I say mold, that is a specific type of fossil where we have a hole that was created by an organism that had gotten covered up. So let's take my little Stegosaurus right here and let's make a mold. To do that, I'm going to make certain he's pretty clean. I don't want to have any gross bits on him. Anything's going to mess it up. I'm going to press him nice and flat into my sand. So lay it down nice and even and press gently. You're just trying to make an imprint of him in the sand. You don't want to smush the sand around too much. So press down nice and gently. There we go. And then lift it out as nicely as you can. There we go. So you guys can see I've made this mold right here. This is this open hole right here where you can see evidence that my dinosaur was in here. So this is an example of a mold. Now, what we're going to do now is we're going to take this mold and we're going to make it into a cast fossil. So remember, like I said before, whenever minerals would kind of seep in there and then harden, and that's what happens whenever you have a cast fossil. So that's what we're going to create in the end. So I've got my plaster of Paris all mixed up. I'm going to scrape off any extra right there. Make sure none of it settled on the bottom. And I'm going to pour it into my mold. Now try and get it just inside that little mold that you made. And don't overflow the edges if you can. I'm going to pour it nice and evenly, making certain I fill in every little bit. Ooh, almost got a little bit too much right there. There we go. Maybe a splash more. There we go. So now you guys can see I filled in all of those low spots that I made with my imprint. Now that cast is going to dry over a couple hours, then I'll be able to dig it out. You can make other types of fossils if you wanted to. For instance, if I wanted to take some footprint fossils, I could just have this guy kind of move like this and smush his feet in the sand a little bit. Then I could pour some leftover in his little footprints. These guys are going to turn into casts of that guy's feet. You could also do this with your own feet if you wanted to. Alright, so I'm going to let this guy dry for a couple hours. What I want to do is I want to show you one that I made a little bit earlier. We're going to dig this guy up and we're going to look at how it turned out. Here's one that I made a few hours ago. You can see he's no longer liquid, he's dried, he's pretty hard right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to dig him out and then I'm going to dust him off. So this is how real paleontologists, people who study dinosaur fossils, would dig this out. They'd want to gently kind of lift it up, so I don't want to grab it too hard, I don't want to break it. I'm just going to kind of gently dig around my fossil until I can kind of get just underneath it. There we go. Lift it nice and gentle so it doesn't break. Now I'm going to dust all that extra sand off. So this is what they got to do. They got to get all that extra sand off. And they have to be gentle because this is actually really fragile, believe it or not. It looks like it's made out of rock, but it's actually a bunch of minerals that have just gotten in just the right way to create this. All right, dust it off a little bit more. There we go. That's really coming out nicely. So take a look at that guy right there. There is my cast fossil of this guy right here. What do you think? Looks a lot like it, doesn't it? So, hopefully you guys have a lot of fun doing this experiment and creating your own cast fossils. I'm excited to see what you guys will use in order to create these. Well, hopefully you guys have a lot of fun doing this experiment. Thanks so much for hanging out with me, and I'll see you guys next time.